Thank you. So my name is Tewkesbury. I'm the Associate Director of Environment and Sustainability at the University of Southampton. I've been asked to chair this session because for a number of years I've looked after the university's travel plan, so very interested in the conversations around transport and the links to our strategy for carbon reduction and the implications that can have. So I'm sure it will be a really interesting discussion. I'm going to ask the panel members just to introduce themselves very quickly, so 2 minutes each for an introduction, and then we'll get into the Q&A session. So if you could start putting questions into the Q&A thread, that'll really help. We can get straight on with some of those. So if we could start, I'm going to work where I'm on my screen. So we could start with Bahaj. Could you please give your intro?
Thanks very much, Adam. I am Bahaj, and I'm a professor of sustainable energy at the University of Southampton. I lead the Energy and Climate Change Division within the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And my group is roughly about 40 to 50 people looking at renewable energy, energy access, cities and infrastructure. We look at buildings and communities, emissions and carbon, and also behavior and modeling and so forth. I presume what I wanted to basically relate to you today is navigating to net zero carbon is not really the only option that we need to be delivering on. We need to deliver on something called the Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17. All the countries in the world, I believe, have signed up to those. And we need to deliver on those by 2030. But carbon is very important. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight to you, if I have been given the chance to give you a slide, is if you look at the city of Southampton under a sea level rise scenario of 1.5 degrees centigrade, you'll see that quite a lot of the infrastructure, especially the harbour and the areas around the rivers, will be underwater. If you go to 4 degrees centigrade, then Southampton football ground will be a swimming pool. You won't be able to play football on it. So that's the sort of thing that we need to perhaps think about. And the pathway to net zero has already been identified for us by the Climate Change Committee under the 2008 Climate Change Act, which the UK government was the only government in the world to actually indicate a target of 80% by 2050 of our emissions. Obviously now that target is 0 by 2050, and that is delivered through what's called a carbon budget, which is indicated by the Climate Change Committee, and those budgets already being negotiated. One of them is going to 2030 was the carbon budget 5, and now we're trying to negotiate carbon budget 6, which would really commit the government to allowing us to achieve those targets in time. And there are 5 pillars that the Climate Change Committee actually indicated that we need to go around. And those around energy efficiency is the first one that we need to think about. And that energy efficiency also should be included in the second pillar, which is basically our industries or our consumers should also be efficient in their processes and perhaps in the fuels they use. For example, you could look at hydrogen and so forth in that. And then the third one is about decarbonization of the power sector, basically renewable energy systems that we need to have in place. And the fourth one is about carbon sequestration or carbon capture and storage combined with hydrogen, and then how you can use that in terms of hydrogen in relation to heat. How do you decarbonize our heat? So these are the 5 pillars that are given by the Climate Change Committee to allow us to achieve this net zero. And the second option is not the second option, and the options there are for people to make their own plans to achieve it. So my university, for example, have got a sustainable strategy which was announced at the last October, which is made of 6 goals. 3 of the goals is about the operational carbon, and 3 of the goals is about our activities or businesses. And those goals have to be achieved by 2030 to achieve the net zero. But then moreover, you can go across and look at cities. So about a lot of cities had declared climate emergency, but obviously some of them do not have a way or a method to assess what does that mean. For example, Southampton City Council declare a climate emergency, and they have 5 pillars of achieving that climate goals, and those are around energy, around green spaces, air quality, waste, and transportation. And we at the university worked with them and developed for them a tracker that tracks their progress, assess them now, and track how they progress during the years. For example, the score for this year and the score for next year, and they can have that information coupled up on that tracker, and they can improve minute year on. I will keep my what ifs for what we need to do later on, because Ben already mentioned that we need to have that, and I'll leave it to the end. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Bakr. Thank you very much. Andy, do you want to do a quick intro, please?
My name's Andy Whincup, and I work for Sustrans. I'm the project officer delivering the Highways England funded Solent Travel Demand Management project, which is delivered on behalf of My Journey, which is a consortium of Southampton City Council, Portsmouth City Council, and Hampshire County Council. And our job is to reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles travelling along the M27 and the M3. So I work primarily with companies and workplaces along those 2 corridors to see if we can find ways of reducing the number of cars that are going along the motorway during that period. Given as I work for Sustrans, I have to articulate that our vision is of a society where the way we travel makes for healthier places and happier lives for everyone. So alongside the carbon reduction agenda, there is an element to which the way we travel impacts on public health, and both in terms of air pollution, in terms of congestion, in terms of physical activity, and in terms of mental health, and how that makes for happier, more vibrant places that people can live. So it's very much the intersection of the carbon and environmental agenda alongside that public health agenda, and making Southampton and the Solent region a better place for everyone to live and work. That's what we are interested in, and how we can facilitate that for people. And that's much less than 2 minutes, but I'll try and keep our piece on so we can give a chance for the Q&A.
Thank you, Andy. Just before we move on to Ben, I can't see any transport or questions popping up. So if you've got any, pop them in. We'll be hopefully onto the questions very soon. Ben, could you do your intro, please?
Yes, hello everyone. Obviously, I had a piece earlier on from the perspective, but I'm Director of Sustainability, Energy and Water Efficiency for Skewb. We're a kind of relatively young startup, but we're working across the utility sector. So we're about transitioning utility companies to meet the new demands of the of net zero and other challenges. I was previously head of water efficiency at Southern Water. So obviously demand management in both energy and water are both top of my priority list. So yes, one of the key things that has recently been launched by the water sector is a net zero strategy that Water UK launched within the last 12 months. And we're about to see the plans of each of the water companies coming forward about how they're going to meet that. Obviously, water is key for a number of reasons, but clearly the use of water in the home is related to hot water usage and energy demand. Water companies are obviously abstracting and pumping and cleaning water and moving it around. It's a very expensive, heavy item to move. So energy demand is a huge issue. And it was quite a groundbreaking commitment that all the water companies have come up with in transitioning to net zero. And similarly, on the energy side, we know that obviously, for example, the gas networks are all looking at hydrogen in a very big way and how they transition to that going forward. So yeah, looking forward to taking part in today's session, and I've got some thoughts about transport as well to make sure it's balanced between energy and transport.
Amit, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Amit Roy. I'm the CEO and founder of my company called Engas UK Limited. We're offering green hydrogen production using our own electrolyzers and our own hydrogen compressors. We are also selling our biogas upgrading plant, which is also effectively a carbon dioxide capturing technology at the same time. I have a fuel cell background. One of my company that we started together from day one called AFC Energy, listed on the stock market. I was a member of the UK's Green Hydrogen Standards Committee appointed by DEC, now BES. I was also a member of OIML, it's an organization on gas metering for product safety and standards appointed by BES. I'm also a senior lecturer at the University of Portsmouth at the School of Energy and Electronic Engineering. I lead a new industry-focused bachelor's and master's degree program. I'm really proud of that program because it is offering some cutting-edge new technologies to make our students industry-ready when they graduate to meet the growing demand for jobs in this new energy sector. That's me.
Amit and Tom, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Lovely. Yes, thanks, Adam. And very good morning, everyone. And thanks to Future South as well for bringing us all together today for some really important subjects. So I'm Tom White. I am a solution architect and the Maritime and Ports lead at the Connected Places Catapult, which if you don't know of us or have worked with us directly, we're the UK's innovation organisation under Innovate UK for transport and place, where of course decarbonisation is a huge part of what our future challenge and opportunity. So just by way of a brief introduction, over the past 12-18 months, the Connected Places has really stepped up really the support that we're delivering to the transport sector and to maritime ports in particular around decarbonisation, having produced the UK Ports of the Future vision for the Department for Transport last year, as well working with friends at, for example, Portsmouth International Port on local traffic modelling and demand systems to help reduce congestion in the city that is caused by port activity. As well, I think one of the key themes we've been discussing over the last year or more with partners has been around actually the role of transport hubs in wider decarbonisation of transport and place as potential multimodal energy hubs, building on multiple future renewable energy vectors, both to reduce risk associated with investment in new technologies where perhaps future energy vectors aren't certain across certain nodes, international shipping, for example. As well, we've done a lot of work, I think, relevant particularly for the South and the Solent around the Freeport Initiative and how that can actually be used as a bit of a spark to more activity in transport decarbonisation, stimulating investment in net zero technologies, bringing the ecosystem together and things like that. So yeah, very much looking forward to the discussions today.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. That's great. And I see we've got a couple of questions now starting to come in, so we get straight on into the question session. So first one that's popped up is, so the Solent's geography is quite unique. What are the key challenges in a joined up approach to commercial, military and leisure needs on land, sea and the air? Anyone like to comment on that one? Anyone want to jump in? Andy, go for it.
Yeah, the whole Solent area is quite an unusual circumstance in that in a lot of other places where Sustrans works, you're either working in an urban area or you're working in a rural area, and that interaction of the urban environment and the peri-urban environment and the maritime environment together makes it one where you have to be quite creative when looking at solutions. I mean, I was talking to someone actually this morning about the role that water transport has in making journeys shorter. And so it's in other places it's relatively straightforward in that you look at, you know, major transport corridors and you look at how you can move people away from the more polluting ways of transport and those kinds of things towards less polluting ways of transport. But this area you have to be really quite creative. I mean, and particularly when it comes to connecting places together. So connecting the likes of the kind of the eastern edge of the New Forest with Southampton and the urban areas there has that kind of maritime element, and also connecting places like Gosport and Hayling Island with Portsmouth. You've got to look at that. And I'm quite a big believer when it comes to kind of personal mobility in really leveraging that that multimodal way of traveling. So it's how you daisy chain different ways of getting people about is really important for getting people around. But I think there is also something to be said, and someone mentioned the military thing, which is not something that's often particularly articulated in these, that there are areas in and around our area which are kind of no-go areas for personal mobility and for kind of corporate mobility because of that kind of military embargo on free movement through those. And it's a thing that doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on kind of day-to-day stuff, but it's something that you kind of have to bear in mind when designing networks and trying to put linkages together, that there will be obvious straight lines through the landscape and seascape that aren't really open to us, particularly when you're looking kind of in the depths of Portsmouth Harbour and that whole area of the Solent and kind of the strategic importance of that area. But I think it's around looking at how we get people from the kind of the small urban centres, the likes of Bishop's Waltham, the likes of Colden Common, the likes of Havant, how we deal with those people who are working in the two big urban centres of Portsmouth and Southampton, how we get them moving to and from those without having to resort to personal cars and single occupancy car use. And I think it is about leveraging in the fullness of time public transport, and it is about creating new infrastructure. But that's kind of me on my high horse of getting people active and moving around. So I will stand down whilst other people put their tuppence worth in.
Bakr, you want to come on that too?
Yeah, I think one of the important things to recognize about multimodal, in fact, any transportation system, is the economic case. And although the region has got a fantastic, it's fantastically surrounded by water, we don't have ferries to join up between, let's say, Portsmouth and Southampton. We also have a rail network that will not take rail tracks that will not take faster trains. So investment in the infrastructure is dominated by the amount of by the economics that is around, and therefore I believe that now with the gear up to zero carbon transportation, there is an opportunity for the region, perhaps should be led by the LEP, to have this integrated approach around how to get our buses connected to railways and also connected to by ferries and so forth around the region, and upgrade our rail networks. And I think that'll be an economic question that will drive that.
Good points. Tom, did you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose just building on what Andy and Bakr have said, really, I think one of the big challenges is actually establishing this systemic approach to how we move people and goods around the region. And exactly as Bakr said, I mean, part of the problem is the business case that we're going to need commercial bodies delivering a lot of these services. And if that's not a viable business, for example, in a water taxi, then that's not going to work. And likewise, my point on a systemic approach, a water taxi that gets you potentially off a car driving over a bridge onto a water taxi going across the water in a cleaner way only really makes sense is if your onward travel options once you reach the land on the other side exist. So, but it's about understanding who's moving from where, and as part of that, what potential water taxi service do we need? Something like micro mobility services on the other side, or e-cargo bikes, or whatever it happens to be able to remove the car journey. So I suppose I'd just say it's considering the whole journey approach really around places and that whole end-to-end aspect of it.
Thank you. Unless other panel members want to come in on that point, I think I was going to suggest we move on to another question. Is that okay with everyone? So there's one that's sort of popped up the voting. So during the first two lockdowns, Southampton City Council installed new bus and cycle lanes. They're now being removed. Is this a step forward or backwards? And how can we get the electorate on board? That's a loaded question. Right, who's brave enough to come in on that one? Ben, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think this is quite an interesting one, because this gets to the real heart of what you could call culture wars, but you could also look at how we view the kind of future of living, because not everyone is going to cycle. There's people that are not all going to cycle, but cycling is going to be an integral part of our future, both to get us healthier, but also to make it easier to get around. I mean, I don't know if any of you have visited Holland, but it's such an amazing country. It really struck home for me when I was going out in the evening in Amsterdam, and you would go down a street and see people dressed up for a night out, but on their bikes. And I think for me, that is the test of when cycling has really been embedded into the culture of the country, because, you know, people, the concept here of anyone getting dressed up to go out for the evening on their bikes probably doesn't reach most people, because they feel like they're going to get sweaty and all the rest of it. But so I think it's kind of one of those issues which polarizes the community. But I actually think the pop-up cycle lanes, you know, are a brave thing to do, and they should have been stuck with. And unfortunately, I think a vocal minority of people have actually got rid of a number of them, when actually the majority of people, when polled, say that they're a good thing. And we have to support this transition. But we live in a crowded country, and it does become, there are issues associated with it.
Bahaj, did you have a comment there?
I'm much aware of what happened in Southampton City Council. You also have a change in administration as well. I think for me, as a citizen of Southampton, I would like the council to be making decisions based on evidence. And that evidence really is required through a robust scientific analysis, why you need these cycle lanes and so forth. I also think that there is a role for all of us to educate ourselves and also educate the public. And I think it's really important to make those two messages around, evidence and education, that will allow us to be much more less impactful in our cities.
Thank you. Andy, I thought you'd probably want to come on this one, so.
I'm not going to talk about whether I think this is a forward or a back step, largely because my funding for my post comes through Southampton City Council. What I will say is that as someone who lives in Winchester, we looked with a certain degree of envy on how easy it is to get around Southampton by a mode of transport that isn't the car. Studies in America have showed, and this is one that I think is absolutely fascinating, when they looked at all the possible things that do and don't encourage people to cycle. They looked at political affiliation, they looked at levels of exercise, they looked at caring about the environment. Nothing matters like infrastructure. Seriously, if you want people to walk or cycle, make infrastructure that makes that easy. If you don't do that, they won't do it. And therefore, installing bus and cycle lanes, installing infrastructure that makes it easier for people to walk and cycle and to use public transport is a good thing. How we get the electorate on board, it kind of builds on what Bahaj said. It's about creating that evidence case. And I know from being inside that we spent a lot of last summer sat by the side of the road counting people going down cycle lanes. So it was an attempt to build that evidence case. Now, there is the evidence case that says there is support for it. Something like, it's interesting, there are more people support cycle lanes than are willing to use them. So something like 76% of people support cycle infrastructure, and only 61% of people say that under any circumstances they would be willing to cycle. There are some caveats in that. A bad cycle lane is almost worse than no cycle lane at all, because it forces people into behaviours that can make things difficult. A good cycle lane makes things really easy, and what we need to generate the evidence that when you build good stuff, people use it, and we need to build on how much we can reduce the amount of people using cars as a result of that. And there are also the knock-on benefits that are harder to quantify, like the improvements on public health when people start having a more active lifestyle. How do we get the electorate on board? Councils and councillors react primarily to the fear of being voted out. And therefore, as employers up and down the country, or as organisations, it is our job to be leaning on the council and going, we are located here because you are pushing forward infrastructure. We are locating here because you are looking to encourage people to use lower carbon forms of transport. we are looking at other options. And that carries weight, and it really does carry weight with councils. The idea that as an organisation that speaks for lots of people, you are throwing your support behind these, and I think that could make a massive difference. But yeah, again, it comes back to Ben's point about culture wars. Any debate on cycle infrastructure tends to be incredibly polarized, and there are the vocal people at both ends shouting at each other, and the vast majority of people in the middle never really get their voices heard. So in terms of getting people on board, it's about trying to work with those people in the middle and give them a voice, whilst at the same time designing really good infrastructure.
They're good points, and I think, if I'm allowed to view myself on it, I think the fact that urban space is limited means that usually one piece of infrastructure will come at the expense of another. So you create those barriers and those discussions, and that's what we're seeing. But at least we're seeing some change. Does anyone else want to come on this question, or should we move on to everyone? Tom.
Yeah, I suppose just comment more on the bus aspect. I think there was some research we've done over the years, and of course there's been lots on it, in terms of how people value their travel time and how you get people involved and engaged in, for example, public transport. And it's certainly a reflection I've had, particularly through the last 12 months over lockdown, is actually how much time was just wasted with me sat behind the wheel of a car, not being able to do anything apart from sit there. Whereas actually, if you are on public transport, you're able to do a lot of many different things. And I think the extension to that is also how we use transport hubs, of where public transport goes to and how we use those spaces. So I think, Adam, to your point, that there's always a trade-off in how you use public space. I think there's also some thinking about actually what are the journeys people are taking, why they're going into town, and actually can the role of transport hubs, where public transport obviously goes to, actually double up for some of the reasons that people are heading out, really, whether that's shared working spaces, meeting space, and all those sorts of things. So again, taking this more holistic view of actually why are people traveling, and how are they valuing that time spent on whatever transport mode they're using.
Good point. I think if we move on to the next question, there's a short question which has probably got a very long answer that's popped up, which is there one direct replacement for petroleum? Who would like to come in and start that discussion? Amit, please do.
I would say, with my hydrogen and bio-CNG hat on, that hydrogen is definitely one of the very potential candidate to replace, because it is versatile, and it does help the growth of renewables. Because if we're going to believe our targets that to be net zero, all the electricity to come from renewables or nuclear by 2050, that means we will have a major mismatch of demand and supply. So that will create a need for energy storage at a bulk scale. So, for example, government is saying 60% electricity comes from offshore wind. So offshore wind, we're looking at even floating wind turbines going into deeper water, so much further away from the shorelines. So there's an opportunity here to produce bulk hydrogen offshore that would also decarbonize the shipping, because that is also another major area and difficult to decarbonize. So hydrogen could be produced by converting surplus and excess electricity. That could then go into a number of sectors. Definitely transport and heating are the two major ones. Within the transport sector, we have some difficult ones like shipping or heavy goods vehicles or railways, etc., where electric vehicles might struggle. I'm not against electric batteries at all. I think we need all of that, just to be clear on that. But at the same time, hydrogen can also be used for power generation at large scale, like CCGT plant, combined cycle gas turbine sectors. Big utilities, I have been in discussion with some of them. They are looking into how to use hydrogen for power generation. So I know there is a very strong feeling around the round trip efficiency, that 60%, 70% electricity will be lost if you convert electricity into hydrogen, store it, and then convert back into electricity. I agree with that. But my simple point is, if you do not store any of these, 100% will be lost. So we need to look at the cost efficiency here. Cost efficiency, I think that will give us a common platform, common denominator to compare different technologies. On that basis, hydrogen does have very strong economics to support that. I don't want to make this a very technical answer for this, but we also need to look at oxygen, because we need to look at the whole thing together. For every 1 kilogram hydrogen we produce, we are also producing 7.8 kilogram oxygen. And the market value of industrial grade oxygen is more than hydrogen. And oxygen market is much bigger anyway, because if you want to decarbonize our steel industries, cement industries, high temperature industries, if you have extra oxygen, it will help to improve the combustion efficiency. So this is completely ignored at the moment. Somebody at the previous session mentioned a very good point, really caught my imagination, was saying that we need new technologies that don't exist today if we're going to meet our net zero goals. So oxygen is one of those things we need to really bring into the discussion how we could do this. At the same time, I touched upon bio-CNG. Bio-CNG is very complementary to hydrogen. We have plenty of waste, organic waste, because with population growth, there will be more and more organic waste. Farming sector does produce a lot of waste in the water sector, sewage sector, etc. If we produce, because I have a technology to produce biogas purified into biomethane and bio-CNG. So if you look at the biomethane sector, biomethane has enormous advantage compared to even hydrogen, because on a volumetric basis, biomethane has 3.5 times energy density than hydrogen. So you need less for the same distance to cover, and that is a huge benefit for biomethane. This is the most energy efficient gaseous fuel on volumetric basis. We do compare hydrogen on mass basis when it serves our purpose. Yes, on mass basis it has the highest energy density, but hydrogen is a gas, so we need to look at the volumetric energy density. On that basis, it is quite lower down the order, and that is where the challenge to implement hydrogen. So if you have biomethane and hydrogen, it could be blended together. So you don't actually have to rely on sophisticated, sensitive technologies like fuel cell, where purity is very important. Hydrogen could be blended with biomethane to actually use the existing gas appliances. So that will help hydrogen. So I guess my answer is not complete, that how to displace petrol, but these are the two technologies, along with other technologies like batteries. They're all complementary. We might be able to address some of those challenges that we are facing today.
Ben, did you want to comment?
Yeah, that'd be great. So I completely agree with all of that, and I think it was really clearly articulated that the role that hydrogen can play. I think we need to look at some major macro areas of policy in this space. So obviously we've got to phase out coal and phase it out fast now across the world, which is a key challenge. But for the UK, I just wanted to sort of raise, and Bakr touched on this earlier on, that actually we've got to tackle those areas where we're using energy in a very wasteful way at the moment. And that's the way we heat our 28 million homes across the UK. So if you look at homes accounting for 35% of energy use and emitting 20% of total carbon emissions, then we need a national retrofit strategy. And this is an area that is currently failing woefully from government, and we need to step up to the plate. So modelling has shown that if you invest just over 5 billion by the end of this parliament, it would create 100,000 jobs across the UK, give government revenue of 12 billion, provide a GDP of more than 21 billion, and unlock 11.4 billion of private capital. That's part of a consortium ask that's just occurred of the government around investing in reducing carbon emissions from our domestic homes. So it's not an answer directly on petroleum, but it's looking at the use of energy more holistically, because we've got to drastically reduce what we're using before we come up with a complete solution to plugging the gaps of how we're going to provide that energy in the future. So that's just a thought for now.
Back, I think you wanted to comment.
I think the question is really quite good. It's very short and to the point. Yes, there is one replacement for a direct replacement for petroleum. It depends how much you want to pay. So that's the really question. And Amit already mentioned the utilization of hydrogen, but you need to remember that petroleum infrastructure is built over the last 100 years. And we're just about starting doing the infrastructure for hydrogen. And if you wanted to make it green hydrogen, then you need to be around where there is a surplus energy that's not going to be utilized for electrification. And unfortunately, in our region, there isn't. We only have one wind farm, which is furthest away from the solar, I would say. But if we have a program where we can develop the photovoltaics, for example, in the Isle of Wight, the other photovoltaics on the buildings, if you can develop the tidal stream energy in the south of the Isle of Wight, if we can have never to spare again, there is real opportunity to deliver green hydrogen. And that's what you want to do. You want to do green hydrogen to replace petroleum. You don't want anything less than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bakker. Andy,
I've got a really short answer to the question, and the answer is no. There isn't one direct replacement for it. There's a lovely quote from the Local Government Association's decarbonising agenda, and it said, there is no decarbonisation strategy that can rely solely on changing the vehicles people drive. Just replacing one fuel with another is never going to deliver us the benefits, the carbon reductions, the health benefits we need. We need to look at the way we move around, whether we actually need to move around. We need to look at that localization agenda, creating those livable cities and towns so that people don't need to use vehicles to go about their daily lives, so they can do all these journeys without resorting to having to get in a vehicle. Can we get those deliveries done locally? It's not going to be easy, and it's going to meet with a lot of opposition. And one of the things that I've discovered recently from talking to a lot of governments, local governments up and down the country, is the biggest opposition to any kind of decarbonisation or sustainability agenda is political will. And it requires people to make difficult and bold decisions that are unpopular in the short term and weather the storm that comes with it. Yes, there are fuels that we need. We will need to keep heating our homes. If we're going to start working from home more, we will need clean and green energy generation to fuel those homes, and we will need to do all those things, and the clean, biomethane, the clean hydrogen, and the infrastructure that goes with it will be part of this solution. But actually, we need to look at significant behavior change to reduce the demand for that fuel in the first place, so that we can start delivering that fuel at a price that people are willing to pay, and in a way that works for everyone.
thank you, Andy. No, good, very good.
The social engineer us then, Andy.
Do you want a one-word answer to that one as well?
I don't know if you can socially engineer
No.
a very old infrastructure. You can't.
No, and we do need to do things.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking.
Andy, I had a supplementary question just on your point. Talking about behaviour change and changing people's behaviour, do you think we've seen that to a significant degree during the pandemic, and do you think that can be sustained?
It pains me greatly as someone who works in behaviour change that if you want to change people's behaviour, you have to change the infrastructure they use. And it's really, we are getting better at behaviour change, and we are getting better at making the case for how different behaviours will actually be better for people in the long term. And one of it is, some of it is around making. I'm going to be really honest with you. I make many of the decisions I make about how I do things because I am lazy, and I am not unique in that. What we need to do is we need to make it easy for people to change to ways of living their lives that are less polluting, and ways that work towards that, work towards carbon zero. And sometimes it's around doing things that are counterintuitive, and sometimes sometimes it's around unpicking some of those social fallacies. So if I drive somewhere because that's the easiest way to get there, and everyone else does the same thing, it takes all of us longer to get there. And and some of the behavior changes around showing people some of the consequences of our actions. And my personal feeling is that some of the behavior change that was enacted around things like smoking and around drink driving and around seatbelts may actually give us some dividends in terms of how we work on behavior change and appealing to people's desire for the world to be a better place, and the fact that we have to do things that we don't like in the short term to help deliver that. But at the end of it, we cannot force people to do anything. We just need to make it easier for those to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's great. I know on the agenda we've got a slot till midday, but I think we've been told we've got till 15:15 because of the later starting point. So we can move on to another question, unless anyone has any other points on this question to raise. No? Right, so we'll move on to another question that's popped up, which is, so smart motorways are increasingly being reported as unsafe. Is the M27 a white elephant, but funds could have been used more wisely for alternative transport solutions? Does anyone want to respond to that one with an answer that's longer than yes? Any volunteers? Go on then, Ben. Thank you.
Well, I was just going to say, in the last question, and relating to this question, we're getting to the heart of where do we see the changes coming in society that enable us to meet what net zero and what COP26 is all about. And okay, will I answer the question on smart motorways? You could make a case for saying you could invest that money more effectively to fundamentally shift society. The problem is with the behaviour change question, because this is all about behaviour change. Can they shift what they're doing to actually reduce the needs to actually expand that motorway? And in order to do that, we're at the point of, do we fundamentally think that politicians need to be telling us things we don't want to hear, and ignoring polling and focus groups, which is telling them what it is that they want to hear? Because if we fundamentally just go down on what is popular, we're never going to make these fundamental shifts in society. We've got to shift at a scale we've never done before. I mentioned earlier on the CFC crisis and how a number of businesses came together to solve the problem at the ozone layer. But that was a relatively simple collaborative project to do that. We are talking about multiple shifts and speeds of shifts. And if we actually believe in that, we have actually all got to change our lives in ways that we're not at the moment wanting to do. And that includes how we travel. So yes, all these individual decisions, you could argue, should not be taken. The problem is the politicians that are making them are listening to the immediate concerns of a whole series of people. So actually, that is why they're being taken. But actually, if we had a government that was really showing leadership, they would now be, well, firstly, Boris should be having a weekly press conference on the climate emergency. Let's start with that. Every week, give an update to the British people about what needs to change this week. If we really believe it's a climate emergency, that's what should be happening. And if we start there, and then business would be reacting accordingly, and that would feed down to issues like the smart motorways, which ultimately the amount of money being spent on the road building programme is not sustainable and does not meet climate targets.
Thank you, Ben. Amit, did you want to come in on that one?
Quickly, short answer. Behavior change does not come without, in most cases, financial incentives. That's the way industries work, many businesses and sometimes individuals work. So who believed 15, 18 years ago when I landed up here that solar photovoltaics will become so economical today? It was not the fashionable thing to have on the roof. So the economic drivers and the behavior change was not there without the incentives. Government would feed in tariff, that created a market, huge demand, that really helped. There's a successful track record with this. Biomethane sector does well. We have a lot of biogas plants, upgrading plants, etc. when the feed-in tariff was switched to biomethane and RHI. So it does help. So without financial incentives and without the cost reduction, without the economic benefit, behavior change becomes much more difficult in my view. So just take one example. A lot of solar PV projects out there who would run out of their feed-in tariff income within the next 8, 9, 10 years down the line when they have their 20 years contract over. But those solar photovoltaic projects will last for another 25, 30 years. There's a lot of life left. So I have been in discussion with some of them. They are looking for the next big thing, and hydrogen does play one of their solution alongside battery storage as well. So I want to just give 2-3 numbers here to make my point. You need about 50 to 55 kilowatt hour of electricity to make 1 kilogram hydrogen. And that cost at a wholesale price of 4 pence, about £2. 1 kilogram hydrogen is equivalent to 1 US gallon of diesel on an energy content basis. That's the like for like. 1 gallon US diesel is equivalent to 1 kilogram hydrogen. But the economic value of 1 kilogram hydrogen is way more than £2 the input electricity cost. But don't forget the oxygen, because you have about 8 kilogram oxygen there as well. So if you put the industrial bulk price of hydrogen and oxygen together, that is almost significantly greater than the input price of £2, £4 of electricity, depending on the electricity cost. Water is not really expensive. You need only 1 liter water to make 1 cubic meter hydrogen. So there is a strong economic case that needs to be communicated to really create these opportunities. As I said at the beginning, nobody believed the solar PV will come down today. Very few people believe the battery technology will be here today. That was 20 years ago. So something could happen with the hydrogen sector as well.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone else? Andy, have you got a comment?
I kind of feel that I ought to say something on this, given that my project is funded by Motorways project. Whether or not they are a white elephant depends entirely on your definition of the problem. And the problem that they were designed to solve was the problem of there not being enough capacity on the road network to satisfy the demand of people wanting to travel on them. And anyone who has tried to drive along the M27 during rush hour will be well aware of the nightmare that is getting past Junction 9. I think it's probably a symptom of how long major infrastructure projects take to bring to bear that the question of what is the problem has moved on since the Smart Motorway project was designed. And there is a recognition with the work that I'm doing that one of the things we need to be doing is to be driving down demand to make it so that governments don't feel the need to carry on building roads at the rate they are. And very much the travel demand management ethos is to reduce the demand for this so that governments don't feel pressurized to keep building major infrastructure projects that are solely focused on getting metal boxes from A to B as quickly as possible. I think that's about as diplomatic as I can be on smart motorways.
Thank you, Andy. Bahaj, did you have a comment?
I think Andy taken the thunder of what I was going to say in relation to that, and really, really great to have that answer from somebody who is actually working at the coalface of that. But one thing I wanted to emphasize to people here is that we are in a transition phase. That transition phase will require us to use what technologies we have and opportunities we have now to allow us to carry on our businesses and our employment, our pensions and so forth. But we need to keep the pressure about moving into the projected way of net zero. And that's really what we need to have, a two-track approach, a phase that we're going to transition through and also a phase that we're going to end up to.
Thank you, Bahaj. Any other comments on this? I think we've got time for one more question if we move on now. What do you think? Moving on. So there's a question that's been posted up, which is, on the alternative fuels debate, the government seems keen to invest in infrastructure in the north. What can be done in our region not to fall behind, and in what areas do we have the potential to lead? Anyone like to comment on that? Bahaj,
Sorry, this is something that's really been driving quite a lot of my work in the last 12 months. As you gather, you have the government 10-point plan, and that has got real good opportunities for the region. So I've been engaging with local authorities around having infrastructure, especially around the energy and also decarbonization. And I've been engaging with the lab and so forth, and hopefully this region will wake up and work together and to identifying real-time projects that could contribute and benefit from the current opportunities provided by the government. And I think we shouldn't be, worried about just the North doing it. We should have the North and the South doing it. And the project that I'm working around is how to decarbonize heat, transportation, as well as aviation through hydrogen, perhaps. And perhaps Amit and I may have a discussion after this meeting to see how we can go forward. So yeah, the region should benefit, but we need to get all the ducks in place with the local authorities, the businesses, and also the refinery, the port and so forth, to actually talk about these issues. Otherwise, those industrial sites will be stranded assets. And they know that and they appreciate it.
Bahaj, who else would like to comment on this one? Tom, go for it, please.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe relating to some of what Bakr was just saying as well. I think, all the things are happening around the UK. That's always fantastic. I think collaboration is part of the answer of making sure we're part of that, and what all these different clusters are learning around the UK should be absolutely transferable to other regions. But I suppose as a general point, I don't think the Solent or the South's problem has ever been a lack of activity. If anything, it's quite the opposite. It's the huge sheer amount of activity and potential in the innovation ecosystem, and the fact that we've got major air, road, rail, sea connectivity all in the same region. And it's actually making sense of all that and getting everybody to work together from a holistic perspective. So I think in terms of what the South's opportunity could be to lead on things, it's actually that more systemic approach to transport decarbonisation in the context of end-to-end journeys, and less focusing on one specific thing over another.
Good point. Anyone else keen to comment on this one? If not, I think we've got 7 minutes, so we can probably fit in another question if we move on. Amit, do you have a comment?
Quick point that why hydrogen is not happening after the major barriers. I have some numbers to say a short answer that even if we have a free electricity today, the cost of hydrogen will be over £1.50, close to £2 a kilogram. And that is over the current diesel price at the moment. Now that is based on large scale, gigantic scale, refinery scale electrolyzers. And not many sites will be able to use these electrolyzers or not having the surplus power to run those size electrolyzers. And even if you have the power, you may not have the gas grid to take that much of hydrogen away. But if you run these electrolyzers at 30%, 35% time of the year, because that is realistic, because if it is going to be powered by intermittent renewables, the capacity factor will be 1/3 of that. So if you buy a big electrolyzer and run only 1/3 of the time, the price of hydrogen will be tripled. So it will be £4 or £5 a kilogram. So you are further away from the diesel equivalent price. Now, if you add tax on it, so I believe there will be some tax down the line, it is going to be further away. So how to overcome this? Trying to really argue the why it is not happening. So I think there's a need for much lower cost electrolyzers, and also to be suitable at a lower scale, modular scale, so that it can be produced hydrogen could be produced locally so that it does not depend on the expensive infrastructure, gas grid, etc. So you produce hydrogen locally using the stranded electricity from your solar panels or via smart grid balancing, so that you can use this hydrogen locally to decarbonize the heating sector as #1 priority, and also the transport sector where it makes sense without competing against batteries, because battery is brilliant technology at the same time. So cost reduction is the key, and also we need to focus on much smaller scale, modular scale solutions.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm gonna push our luck with 4 minutes to go. We're gonna squeeze in one more question, which is, when do we need to have the majority of the population utilising transport as a service rather than owning their own cars? Has anyone got a succinct answer to that question? Anyone? Anyone keen to comment? Andy, I thought you probably would.
I mean, the simple answer is now, and preferably 10, 15 years ago. But I think there is a major attitude shift that needs to happen to realise transport as a service, and to work together. And it's like what Tom was saying earlier. It's about creating a holistic network that meets people's needs, and it's about creating a holistic network that gets people from their homes to where they need to go, and understanding what those movement needs are, what kinds of things they need to be carrying, how often they need to make those journeys, when they need to go, and what the best low carbon way of doing that is. And it's noticeable that the gender diversity of this panel is not as broad as it might be. And there is an element to which, you know, I, as a straight white fella, am not necessarily best placed to understand the travel needs of someone who doesn't fit the same demographic as I. And I think what we need to be doing now is starting talking to people whose daily routine isn't go into the office in the morning, come home in the afternoon, by a direct route, who are daisy chaining other journeys on top of that, who have care requirements and care responsibilities, who are doing the shopping run on the way to or from work, and how we make it so that we can make those journeys easy to do by a way that isn't by car. And that I think is the real challenge, and it's around redesigning how that network fits together and make it fit the needs of everyone, so that it's easy to make the choice to take on transport as a service rather than hop straight into a private vehicle.
I think the how is easily as important as the when, and that transition is going to take some time. Ben, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Andy's just said, really, that you know, it's very easy for us to sit in a relative comfort to have this conversation, but you've got to look at the whole of society. But I do think the elephant in the room here is, particularly with transport, is that you need to spend quite a lot of money up front to get the confidence, and again, it's something Andy was talking about earlier on, of this modal shift, and that, you know, you've got to make an economic case for everything you're doing in our society. But I think we've got to get back to actually valuing the sort of public role of transport a bit more, and actually seeing it as actually investment for the good of society as a whole. Get some of that moving, and then that will start to get this shift underway. I mean, I think there's some really exciting innovations happening on this last mile. I'm aware of a sort of tour of these electric bikes, which are also kind of mini delivery vans that are going to be coming soon. And they'll help us with this kind of delivery van culture we've got, which is, you know, loads of polluting diesel vehicle vans pulling up to deliver loads of packages of to everyone's homes. So that's really positive. But to sort of join all this up into a modal shift, and again, this is what I was talking about Holland. I mean, they've been doing this for a number of years, so they've got a kind of head start on us. We could learn from them about what they've done. And some of it has been about spending a lot of money up front to start putting in segregated lanes, about actually redesigning roundabouts, about doing all of this activity. And the problem with that is making that economic case in the very short term. You know, I think the economic case is there, but some of it will be upfront spending. But, you know, we've seen with COVID, we were told lots of things couldn't change overnight. about the environment, and yet with COVID we've seen it happen because of the crisis that's been there. So if we really believe this is a crisis, we can do it. It just needs political will.
Thank you, Ben. Conscious of the time, I'm going to draw us to a close there. I'm also conscious I'm sure everyone will be keen to go and get some lunch at some point. But just thank you very much to everyone on the panel. It's been a really useful conversation. Hopefully got some value out of it and covered a lot of the questions that were popping up. So thank you very much.